It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you.
Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. This is another episode of Frontline Friday with my very special guest, Bridget Gleason. Bridget, how are you today?
Andy, I am doing great. And you?
Good. Very well, as a matter of fact. Actually, we're recording this from the island of Kauai, or I am on the island of Kauai.
Wah, 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 wah.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's a hard life you've got. It's a hard life.
Life is rough today. Yes, it is. I have to admit, it is raining here, which was great this morning when I went out for my run. I love running in the rain. So got that one checked off my list on this trip. But yeah, it's not bad. How about you? Where are you today?
I am in Bridget Gleason headquarters in Redwood City. My usual. I don't move around as much as you do, Andy. I don't move around as much.
That's not entirely true. We just got through talking about 2 trips you just took that both were out of the country.
Yeah, but I don't do my travel like I don't do my recording like you do all over the place.
True. Okay. Yeah, you're always at world headquarters. So I thought today we would talk about sales habits. Because, it's just been one of these topics that keeps coming up and up when I talk with more and more executives and sales professionals and so on, is there's, sort of this preponderance of focus on, gosh, we want to train our sales team on skills and so on and so forth. But, at the bottom of it, if you look at a pyramid of things that you need to master to really become successful at sales, at the bottom are behaviors, fundamental behaviors and habits that you have to master. And you can have some skills that just really almost irrelevant if you can master some skills if you don't have some of these fundamental habits or behaviors perfected as well. So I thought it'd be something good to talk about today.
Excellent. I love it.
So in your mind, what are 1 or 2 of the most important sales habits that, I'll say sales professionals broadly, whether you're a sales rep, an SDR, an account exec, or whatever, what ones are important that you look for, that you want to make sure that your people who work for you have mastered, have locked down tight?
Well, I look at things, I see habit and discipline as being sort of joined at the hip. So I look for good habits as I look for good discipline. So, for example, a good habit would be blocking your calendar and being really organized with how you spend your time. And the great sales reps that I've known and worked with have made it a habit. At the beginning of the day, they look at their calendars and they run their calendars. They don't let their calendars run them. So they're the ones that they may have meetings sprinkled throughout the day, but they've blocked out time where they're perhaps cold calling, where they're following up on opportunities, where they are doing research, where they are in meetings, whatever it is, but they run their calendars as opposed to letting their calendars run them. And so it's having good time management and really turning that into a series of habits, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have sort of a little ding right there, too, to emphasize that. I like that.
I know those special dings that I put in.
Yeah, I love the way you edit those in. So, it's just sort of a couple different points there. One is a discipline, the same as a habit, which we can certainly come back to. But specifically to this point, you're talking about managing time as opposed to having time manage you, or managing calendars as opposed to count. I think that's absolutely essential. Yeah, I think that if whether you do it at the end of a business day for the next day, or you do it first thing in the morning, if you don't have time set aside for specific tasks, they don't happen. We're all too busy at any level of an organization. There's always more demands on our time than we have time available to fulfill them.
Right.
And so if you're not specifically blocking out the time, prospecting is a great activity, especially if you're a sales rep and that's your job. It could be for follow-ups. It could be for, spending time with existing customers that you're going to, in terms of maintaining your connection with them and taking the next steps with them. Yeah, it's got to be on the calendar. I mean, I do that.
What else do you hear?
I mean, I do that for myself in terms of because we record this podcast and I put out 6 new episodes a week. I'm writing a new book. I've got all these things that I'm doing, working with clients. Is that if I'm not blocking out the time, I'm sunk. I'm lost.
What else do you hear, Andy? I mean, you interact with a lot of different companies and people and coaches, and what do they talk about as the habits that they look for?
Well, I think one of the real key areas, just sort of broadly, that's not a habit, but it's an area of concern, has to do with, and we've touched on this before, has to do with how do we improve our ability to engage with our prospects and, really engage with them, have meaningful sales conversations with them. And I think there are several things that sort of fall into a habit category that play into that. And, one of them is, I call it, ask, don't tell. When you first meet the prospect, don't fall into giving your pitch, but ask questions, show your level of interest in them first. Now, this is actually sort of a nice behavior to have in general, both in your personal life and in business life. When you meet somebody new, to demonstrate an interest in them as opposed to making it all about yourself. If you want to make that connection. And so this is one that to me is a habit. If you get into the habit of leading with questions, demonstrating interest in the other person, you're going to go farther in life. You're going to go farther in your sales career. And this is a habit that you have to acquire. You can call it discipline, but acquire through practice the habit of doing this. And remember conversation I had with Mark Roberge, formerly of HubSpot, who talked about an exercise he does when he meets new people is to sort of, not taking it to annoying extremes, but when he meets somebody new is, sort of see how many questions he can ask of the other person before he has to say something about himself.
God, that's a great test. That's a great test. I love that.
Yeah. So if you think about, you go to a wedding, go to, some social event where you're going to be meeting new people, outside of the business context, there's all these opportunities to practice this. And so it becomes a habit that you practice both on the personal and on the business side. But the impact for, potential buyer that you're meeting with the first time is, I think they all sort of brace themselves when they, first meet a new rep. It's like, I'm going to get the pitch, right? And it's sort of like the pain I have to go through in order to get to the substance of what we want to talk about. But geez, what if you surprise them by getting into the substance more quickly? By talking about them, asking about them.
And I like that, Andy, to be considered. This is something that we think about as a habit, which is also a skill, but also think about it as a habit, something that we do regularly.
Yeah, well, I think that I look at the skill as a different level, right? As if I get into the habit of leading with questions, I'm going to develop the skill of asking better questions by practicing this habit, right? Through experience, I'm going to learn through the feedback I get from the prospects or people in my life, better questions to ask. And so I think you need to have the habit before you can acquire the skill. And I think this is actually where sales training oftentimes goes off the tracks for so many companies, is that it comes in and says, look, we're going to teach you how to ask better questions. And it's like, okay, that's our sales training. But, they don't even have the habit yet of leading with questions, the people they're training. And so, there's a really in my mind, a huge misalignment there. And so to me, I want to focus on, let's build the habits first. Then you can master the habits and they turn into skills.
Yeah, I would challenge that a little bit in that, there's also a school of thought, which is you don't want to have bad habits. And if you don't have the skill developed, you may develop a bad habit because you don't have the skill. So in some ways, I'd rather get the skill and start to develop the skill. And when that's perfected, turn that skill into a habit.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a matter of perspective, right? Is repetition of a skill to master a skill requires repetition, right? And you get the repetition by turning that into a habit. And so that's why I think it's, sort of one before the other. And this is where, again, I think that oftentimes we do a disservice with sales reps is that we don't do enough to work with them to say, okay, here are some really core habits. If you can integrate this habit into your day-to-day work, into your day-to-day process, then, wow, the ripple effect throughout the rest of your selling is pretty substantial. Because as you continue to master it and ask better and better questions, then, wow, you just become more and more effective.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, like you said, it could be a little bit cart before the horse. And I guess it's an iterative process. Skill and habit, skill and habit. I think it's never a set and forget. So I think skill building and even looking at habits, it's not a set and forget. It's something that we constantly need to revisit and work on if we're going to remain relevant and effective.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think that, and I think we're sort of talking somewhat about the same thing, which is in terms of me and my experience, and when I've worked with sales reps, it's like, yeah, let's get this building block in place first, right? I mean, the same thing is another one that I love is as a habit is, once you've asked your questions, let's say, one of the habits we want to get people to train on is to ask better, lead with questions, is then the next habit is they have to learn how to listen to the answers.
Mm. And why do people have such a hard time with that?
Well, I think that part of it is that, and this is not, this is not new by any stretch of imagination, is sales professionals, we tend to be a little scripted in how we approach, right? We know the 5 questions we need to ask. And so when we ask the first question, then we're already looking for what that next question is, right? We're thinking about what the next thing we're going to say is, and we're not really listening to what the client has said. And I'll give you a perfect example. Is I was just listening to some recorded calls that SDR and an account exec, it was actually a handoff. SDR started it, handed off to the account exec. And in both instances, and these are experienced SDR and experienced AE, is they'd ask a question of the customer would answer it, and there would be this silence. They'd say yes. And they clearly then would step to ask the next question that was on their list, as opposed to asking a question in response to what the customer said. And that's a huge missed opportunity, right? To deepen the engagement, to maybe start differentiating yourself from all the other sales reps that are talking to that potential buyer that are just lockstep following their script. But I hear this time and time again when I either attend calls or I'm listening to calls like I was with these, is just they're not really paying attention to the answer. They might be writing some notes down, but then instead of having the habit of saying, I want to ask a follow-up to that. I'm sort of listening without judgment, I call that, right? I'm limiting my filters. What's the next great question to ask? Now we just go to question number 2 on our list. And that's a bad habit that you need to change.
Yeah, and it reminds me of sort of a pet peeve of mine, which is people forget that sales is a conversation. It's not a presentation. And in order to have a conversation requires active listening. It's a building on what's happening. When it's a presentation, it's just, okay, I need to say this and I need to say this, or I need to ask this. So to your point, Andy, about being too scripted, it's a conversation. And if it's a conversation, it's about exploration. It's about asking. It's about learning. It's about inquiring. It's about listening. And it's really trying to get a deeper understanding. And I think you're right that too often salespeople mistake what they're doing, and it looks a lot more like a presentation. You have the other person there and you ask a few things, but really all you're trying to do is say things. And you only want to push things out as opposed to things coming back in. And that's not very effective.
No. And as I said before, you miss opportunities to deepen the engagement because in this one call, the SDR asked a question about, how many, without revealing who the vendor was, how many of this certain thing do you need, right? Like how many seats do you need, let's say, for this software as a service they're selling? And the buyer gives an answer. And he never comes back and says, why do you need that many? Where are they going to go? Who's going to use it, right? What's the profile? What is the application? None of that. Just went to the next question. And it's just like, that's such a missed opportunity. So that's one.
And, and Andy, when that happens to me, when I'm on the receiving end of that, I have to tell you, I feel hostile. Like, I don't like it. I feel like I feel so offended is not the right word. Really hostile is the right word. I'm not proud that I feel hostile, but I do. I feel like I feel not valued when it's just this, like, they're not really listening. It's not a good use of my time. And no. I don't take it very well.
Yeah. Well, I think it reflects badly on multiple levels. I think part of the perspective on part of the buyer is, oh, okay, so we're just going to be sort of superficial here, as you sort of talked about. We're just going to be sort of superficial. Well, they're sort of projecting that out into the future, right? How's that going to play out in our long-term relationship? You're always going to have sort of the superficial level of interest, or you're really going to, if I have a problem, I buy from you and I have a problem, you're really going to dig into it, or are we just going to, do what's most expeditious?
Yeah, and I think it's too bad when a sales rep presents him or herself that way, because then the company, by default, is also perceived that way. And so, as you said, if you're not digging into my problem, then I'm going to carry that and extend that feeling about the whole company. You may have other parts of the company that are excellent at caring for the customer once they become a customer. But if the sales rep is presenting something different, that's what's going to be carried forward in the mind of the prospect. That, they're not going to dig in. They're not going to listen. If I really have an issue, this is how it's going to get handled.
Yeah.
So the sales rep can do a huge disservice at the early stages of misrepresenting, where other parts of the organization may actually be quite different and quite customer oriented. But if the sales rep is not demonstrating that early, there's no way for a prospect to get that sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. So, sort of along the same lines. So to me, another key habit is for sales reps to consciously, deliberately say, every time I'm going to interact with a potential prospect or a potential buyer, that I'm going to have something of value I'm going to provide them during that interaction. There's something that's going to help them, that I'm going to provide them, that's going to help them move closer to making a decision. Otherwise, why am I consuming their time?
I couldn't agree more violently than I am agreeing in my head. Yes. With time, we can never get time back.
And to me, this is a habit.
It is a habit. It's a habit, and it's a courtesy. You need to be able to provide something of value. You need to bring something to the table. Otherwise,
you're not respecting their time.
You're not respecting. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And as you said, as a courtesy, that's very obvious to customers if you're not respecting their time.
That's right.
Much like leading with a pitch. I think So I think another one we'd sort of talked about questions. Another sort of follow-up to that, to me, is a great habit to have. And it's not like you need to have all of these habits, but ideally it'd be great, but not everybody does, is what I call, ask the extra question. And, there's several people who've written some good stuff about this, so I wish I could claim credit for it, but can't. But it's, so a customer gives you you ask a good question of the customer, they give you a response, and we've talked about this before, is then you say, okay, well, that guy was interesting, so what else can you tell me about that? Or, interesting, tell me more, right? It's being able to extend yourself that one step to ask that extra question, especially that one, like, tell me more, or what else can you tell me about that? That again deepens that immediately deepens that engagement with the customer. They're going to take you to places where they're not necessarily going with your competitors.
It's interesting that you're bringing this up. I read this great book called actually in the middle of it, The Most Beautiful Question. And it's all about the importance of questions.
Interesting.
And why.
That's the name of the book?
Yeah, the most beautiful or the most beautiful or the more beautiful question. And it's, and it's all about asking how really to keep moving forward and in business, in your career, it's not about having the answer, but it's about knowing the questions to ask and extending the conversation and thinking about things differently. It's a really provocative, very interesting book.
Okay. So sounds like a book.
A More Beautiful Question by Warren Berger.
Warren Berger. Okay. A More Beautiful Question. All right. So there we have a recommendation. We got Frontline Friday. We have to have a book recommendation.
I know. I always have them, don't I?
Oh, that's a good one. I like that one. That's going on my list.
It should go on the list. It's a good book.
Excellent. And it's a relatively recent book, too.
Yes.
All right. Very good. All right. Any other habits on your front that you think are important people should master?
I think those are good ones to start with. I think those are pretty basic. And, I find that typically if we just pick one or two things, we're more likely to dig in and be able to do them than if we pick a whole bunch of things. And I think those are basic, very important ones.
Well, you bring up a key point, which is, and this is a topic that I plan that we'll discuss more and more in the upcoming months, is that, there's no shortage of things you can do within your daily routine, these habits, disciplines that perhaps could help you improve. But to your point is, there's no shortage of them. You can't master all of them. You can't incorporate all of them into your routine. So it's really important to pick some number, start small, the ones that will have the biggest ripple effect throughout everything you do. And
right, even pick one.
Yeah. Well, you got to start somewhere. So start with one. But I'm a big believer, if anybody's read the book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, it talks about what's called keystone habits. And these are the habits that could be one habit that does have the sort of pebble in the pond effect where you get the ripples that has an impact on everything you do. And one of my favorite habits is responsiveness. This is one to me that if anybody's going to choose one, we didn't get a chance to talk about it today, but that's one that if you commit yourself to being absolutely and completely responsive to your prospects and your customers at all times, you're going to find your level of success will go up. I guarantee you, your level of success is going to go up.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Okay. Well, Bridget, we've come to the end of this particular show. I want to thank you for joining me. I want to thank our friends who have joined us, listening to us today. Really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to spend with us as we talk about habits today, but sales in general. So thank you very much. And Bridget, I look forward to talking to you next time.
And likewise.
All right. Bye now.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.